This podcast on the intersection of mental health and public health features Dr. Julian Bass. Dr. Bass holds a bachelor's and master's degree from Fisk University in psychology and clinical psychology, as well as a second master's and doctorate in clinical psychology from the Wright State University School of Professional Psychology. Dr. Bass has 15 years of experience working with individuals, families, and couples across various settings. Dr. Bass is currently a licensed clinical psychologist in private practice with the Great Lakes Psychology Group, the newly appointed clinical director for Connor Creek Life Solutions, and the former president of the Association of Black Psychologists Metro Detroit chapter. On a personal note, I met Dr. Bass when he served as the project director for a SAMHSA grant where he spearheaded a conference titled Healing, Health, and Hope at Meharry Medical College, where former SAMHSA Center Director Dr. Wesley Clark was the keynote speaker, and monologues from my play, The Divine Intervention Monologues, were featured for audience engagement. Listen in as Dr. Bass discusses mental health and the pandemic within the context of uptick in substance use as a coping mechanism and how to address public health issues through a lens of mental wellness. As I trust Dr. Bass as a therapist, I was very candid in sharing my own unhealthy coping strategies during the pandemic as he shed some light on why many of us chose sugars and carbs to bring us comfort during COVID-19. Dr. Julian Bass.
So that impressed me among some things. Your creativity, your innovation, how you took those divine intervention monologues and you actually you didn't just show them. You actually got the people, your clients, involved in that process. And
Absolutely.
I thought, what a segue to talk about, how you took your work and bridged the gap between mental health and public health. And that's one of the things I want to start with. In terms of mental health, what is imperative in the work that you're doing right now? Some 10 years later. And I know you never thought you'd be in this place, right? Where in addition to talking about COVID-19 as a pandemic, mental
Right.
health is one of the anecdotes, right? So, yeah.
Right. So definitely with my personal work, I think I know with your particular blog, Dr. Q, you've had the pleasure of interviewing a whole lot of different people, and I'm not really sure what all their backgrounds were, but
Yeah.
I'm sure a good portion of them came from more of the empirically evidence type of background and strong research and things of that nature. I started my career that way, but I was always a clinician, 10 toes on the ground, foot soldier. I needed to be there and have an active role in the healing. So I moved more towards a practice-based evidence type of model. So that being the case in the present day with the pandemic and all the residual issues that it's causing, we're seeing increases in trauma, increases in substance use, increases in anxiety and depression and divorce and relational dynamics and the whole nine. So the work that I'm doing now is really about helping people survive this current pandemic and then finding their way to thrive again as we really enter a post-pandemic period, because we are calling this kind of a post-pandemic period, but we're not really there yet. And not with numbers spiking the way they are, variants popping up all the time. We're really still in the thick of it. The only thing we've been able to kind of move past has been the quarantine phase, which we did relatively successfully. But now we're dealing with the residual fallout while still actively being involved and engaged in this crazy time. So with that comes a lot of pathology, a lot of fear, a lot of concern, a lot of trauma, and there's just a lot of work to be done that probably will be going on for several years to come, unfortunately.
So one of the things I want to ask you about, this is I tend to try to simplify public health and mental health, the intellectual work that we do using what I call the one word. And the one word that I want to throw out to you and get your response to it is relapse. Because a lot of people, 2019 going into 2020, it was going to be their year. I'm going to give up cigarettes. I'm going to give up alcohol, gambling, whatever lifestyle deviant, whatever has been keeping me from achieving my goal. I'm going to be on a path to greatness in 2020 and then relapse.
Yeah. So no, that's that's a great word. So let's talk about that because there's a little bit of, for many individuals, an erosion of what their goals were, right? So a lot of times when we come to a place in our lives where we're ready to make a change, it's because we've kind of tapped into some of our inner resources and developed them a little bit more, whether it be our resiliency, whether it be our support system, whether it be our self-confidence, whether it be self-insight. So we reach a point where we establish a stage of readiness to make the change. However, um, that occurs at that particular level. But then when you have a bigger stressor come along that you're not prepared for and can't adequately adapt to, well, then the brain's going to do what the brain does. The brain's goal, one of the brain's major goals is homeostasis, how to keep us in our comfort zone. Now, this comes with pros and cons, and the brain's not discerning about what's positive and negative. The brain only knows what works at maintaining homeostasis. So when it comes to comfort, if all of a sudden I'm trying to make a change, but I'm hit with a significant stressor that I can't adjust to, my brain wants to as quickly restore a state of comfort for me and return me to my comfort zone. And for me, that might require that crack cocaine. It might require that alcohol. It might require that gambling or that sex addiction or those unhealthy, toxic relationships, because my brain knows that is what will help calm me down adequately in this moment. Now, long term, it's a horrible technique, but in the short term, it's highly effective, and the brain's only interested in surviving the now. The issue with the comfort zone is, although it puts us in, those methods put us in more relaxed states, it's in the discomfort zone where we actually grow, where we actually evolve to the next level. So we find this conflict of what our desire is and what we want to do versus what our brain's trying to accomplish with help us, again, helping us survive the moment. So when this stressor came along and this pandemic and all this fear and all this death and all this uncertainty, the unknown being one of the greatest fears of all time, when that occurred, it was a stressor that many of us weren't really mentally prepared for, overloaded us. We were flooded with all types of emotions, and the brain wanted us to return to our comfort zone as quickly and easily as possible. And for some of us, that meant relapsing on, our previous vices that we know were effective. Because in the community of substance use, traditionally, it's been fairly judgmental, right? If you're using drugs, you get put in the sinner category, or you get demonized or what have you. But the reality is, from a psychological standpoint, people do what works. I will never tell someone who has a particular vice and is addicted to a particular substance or behavior or what have you, that what you're doing isn't effective, because you're doing it because functionally it works. Functionally, when you were going through the loss of your grandmother and you started drinking, it helps you avoid dealing with the pain, which was your goal, because we're goal oriented. We want to do what helps us achieve our goal. If the alcohol helped you achieve your goal of avoiding the pain, well, then it was effective. However, the problem is long term, it does more damage than in the present moment. So there's no balance there. Makes it very easy to start developing that pattern in the brain, to recognize that pattern, that become the method and create the mental breadcrumbs to walk us back towards those old patterns, to reestablish the comfort we know to survive.
So I want to bring this to another level. I want to talk about at least two good addictions. And if you can read between the lines, being the good doctor that I know you are, I'm about to be vulnerable. These are my addictions.
Gotcha.
These are the two things that I relapsed on. Prior to COVID, I had started working on my my menopause weight, and I had gotten it down to like, okay, I'm back in my size 4s and my 6s, and I'm doing the thing.
It.
Yeah, and COVID
Right.
hits, and I went back to my carbs, my sugars, and like, I'm not going out there, I'm not exercising. If I can't do it in the house, I'm not doing it. So then
Sure.
I get the weight back. And so I know that I'm speaking life to a lot of people when I ask you to address that one. The other one is shopping. I got so much stuff that my stuff bought stuff during the pandemic, right? So how do I deal with these quote unquote, retail therapy is this sort of more casual. Yeah, it's a thing. And eating my comfort food. So how do I address that in this pandemic?
So understand, many people put on the COVID-15 during the COVID-19, right?
I put
It's
on
like
20, but that's okay. Go ahead. I'm an overachiever.
so it's essentially it's the same thing, right? It's still
Mm-hmm.
the brain trying to establish some sense of comfort and create a sense of ease within the mind and
Okay.
within the body. So remember, food, everything through our senses are key because they're the way that we experience the world. But everything that we absorb through our senses essentially gets broken down chemically in the bloodstream, and those
Gotcha.
chemicals create chemical responses in the brain, right? Food does it more effectively than sight or even sound, because food is literally composed of vitamins and nutrients and chemicals. So it breaks down chemically. One of the very first things that they get us addicted to in life is sugar, because it's in
Mm.
everything. Sugar becomes
Mm-hmm.
the staple for our natural addiction. It becomes the staple for our natural level of comfort. So it's very easy that when you have it in your carbs, when you have it in your sweets, when we take fruits that already have a natural sugar and want to turn it into a dessert, when we do it in our alcohols, when we, in our pops, in our various beverages and energy drinks, like sugar is practically in everything that we normally consume, which makes it one of our earliest vices. And it's highly problematic because it is comforting,
Mm-hmm.
but also highly dangerous
Right.
in many, many ways, and not just the health implications of how that can impact diabetes or help create the various molecules in the body that facilitate the growth of cancer and things of that nature, but it has a direct impact on mood, because food often has an impact on mood. And what's interesting about sugar, besides the fact that chemically it's almost identical to cocaine, like three chemicals separate the two substances, is that it greatly impacts the happiness unhappiness level of individuals, right? You give a kid
Mm-hmm.
sugar, they're as euphoric as can be. You think they're having a manic episode, energy shoots through the roof, and they're smiling, and they've never been happier until they burn out. But however, you give someone sugar, after a breakup, and you see that quintessential stereotypical scene in television where the
Mm-hmm.
woman was just dumped, and you see her in her robe and she's got the pizza and the ice cream, and you notice it's not till after she starts consuming those things that she finally breaks down and the tears start flowing, because the sugar then exacerbates the depressive state, because
Mm-hmm.
that's what sugar does. It can either elevate the depressive state or elevate the euphoric state. There's not a lot in between. And it comes in the form of the comfort foods, because we're trying to restore the comfort that we no longer feel in the present
Mm-hmm.
moment, whatever the reason, in this case being the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very difficult. It takes a lot of discipline and a lot of drive. And when we're dealing with depression, that essentially is the enemy, because depression is it's a little bit of an oxymoron. Depression is simultaneously one of the easiest things and hardest things to treat, behaviorally speaking, because with depression, a lot of times to treat it, all you have to do is the opposite, to start kind of messing with the brain chemistry and getting it to do what you need to do. If you're staying in bed all the time, well, then you need to force yourself to get out of bed. If you're not socializing, you need to force yourself to socialize. And that starts to have a positive impact on the brain and help you break out of depression. However, when we're depressed, lack of motivation,
Mm-hmm.
lack of energy. So doing the things we need to do to combat it become very difficult. And it becomes very easy to just sit down, pull out the potato chips, get those fries, and just sit there and stuff our feelings and just try and feel better in that moment.
Okay. Well, so you do realize that I'm gonna have to have you back when I start talking about obesity,
Sure.
handling obesity, and just really walking that back. Yeah, go ahead.
Of course. Because what's interesting about obesity is that I think, we approach things in such a separate, segregated type of way, right? It's kind of the nature of how we operate here in the West. But we look at an issue like obesity and we see that as a medical problem, and I would agree that as a result, it has strong medical implications on our overall health. But from an epidemiological standpoint and origin standpoint, it's a mental health problem, because at one point did your lifestyle become one centered around food and developing this unhealthy relationship around food and the need to establish comfort because of how you're currently handling the distress in your life or ineffectively handling the distress, that you would now create this lifestyle that would perpetuate all these health problems later, right?
Right.
It's a situation where the medical aspect is the outcome and the
Mhm.
mental health aspect is the onset.
Mm.
You won't see that in every particular public health issue per se versus something like, I don't know, maybe substance abuse. Substance abuse people look as the problem. That's the symptom. The symptom's the result of everything that's gone wrong. Sometimes that has a mental health onset. Sometimes that's because of a medical onset or a financial onset or what's having. So being able to track the direction and the way things go have an impact on what the therapy process is going to be.
Wow.